as strong as we were still facing the possibility of the whole universe coming down on our heads. We knew this. We knew that cultures that had run on slavery, especially here on Earth, didn't like it too much when you kind of take their slaves away and tell them no. But taking a line out of Cassius Clay, we always had our pistols on us. We always had our guns. We always had everything primed and ready to rock and roll because we knew eventually at least one of those species that wanted to take over everyone else and make them slaves would come for us. And today is that day. It is a day of remembering, a day of horror, a day of rage, and a day that will live on and echo through the eternity of space itself. And it was such a nice day, too. It was such a beautiful day that morning. Sun was shining, birds chirping. I was getting ready for class, and then I realized, oh, that's right, it's Saturday. So classes are late today. Yes, classes go 6 days a week. But on Saturday, they're given a little bit of time because, as we know, kids will be kids, and especially those in college. So we figured, you know what, we'll work with their sleep cycles and their drunk asses. But then I got the alert. An alert that scared the living crap out of me. I pulled up my device and looked, and sure enough, everything, it said what we feared the most: worldwide alert. Incoming fleets. Multiple fleets incoming. Worldwide alert. Multiple fleets incoming. Worldwide alert. Multiple species incoming. Approximate time 1.2 hours. That's barely enough time. I immediately bolted towards my Corvette. I called up my compatriot and I just screamed, "Classes are canceled." And he responded, "No shit," as I could hear him running in the background, running most doubtedly towards his ship. I saw the Corvette, and apparently my crew had received the same message. As the alarms began to sound around the entire academy, I started screaming at any of the cadets that were there, "Get to your ships now! If you don't have one, find one!" And then straight to my ship I went. My crew had already started pre-flight by the time I got in there, got into the command couch, strapped in, locked in with my brain, and began to go through all my pre-flight checks. These didn't take long, as most of the ship itself was automated now. The engineers had improved it so much. I love this ship. And as soon as I got verification that everyone was in and everyone was strapped in, I activated the anti-grav motors and the thrusters, and we were off. Everybody was pinging where they were so that we didn't crash into each other. I tilted the nose straight towards the sky, and I started to call in just as we started to reach the outer stratosphere. "This is Piranha 6 to all Piranha units. I'm only going to say this once. Kill 'em all!" They know that if I say that, I'm not kidding. And I could actually feel the excitement of all of them as I looked in, and I could see the rest of my academy lifting off. Those that weren't in front of me were already trying desperately to catch up. We knew it was only going to be a matter of time before they breached, but I didn't know where. I started screaming towards my radars, "Where are they? Where are they coming from?" And I received an answer that I didn't want to know. "They're everywhere!" What? I immediately shifted my device so that I could understand the radar, and sure enough, they were coming in from every single direction. It didn't matter if you were on the poles of the equator. You just had to point your nose, and they were coming for us. They sent one message before they reached the end of their FTL jump. The message was simple: "Put on your yoke or be destroyed." Well, looks like they took a little bit of knowledge from what we said before. But you know what? We don't take too kindly to the yoke of slavery. I remember even opening my eyes, even though it makes you see double when you're locked in. I spun around and looked at my crew. and they all looked back. We all knew what was going on. We all knew that was going to happen very, very quickly. I simply stated, "To your turrets, now." Everyone who wasn't already on their way detached themselves and immediately floated over. The gravity motors from the inside were shut off to conserve energy, and I began to link in to our general system to find out where the nearest enemy was coming from. It was one I hadn't dealt with before. Another insectoid species, kind of like the chitters, but this one were much, much larger, and they bred much, much slower. But because of their size, and because of the fact a hive mind works together very, very well, it makes them very dangerous. But it also makes them easy to anticipate. But the kicker was, because of their large size, they clearly dominated their area of space and immediately took over any and all of the species close to their sector, and I really, really didn't like them. Of course, the fact that looking at them was absolutely disgusting didn't really help matters. On the other side of the planet, I could hear pinging as a battle group began to form itself up. I was looking in every direction at once, and I say looking, but my eyes were closed as I used the sensors to check every single sector, and I guarantee everybody was doing the same, clicking in and out, trying to make sure they knew what was coming and where to aim. This time, the enemies, they were smart. They didn't try to jump in anywhere close. No, no, no. They didn't try for the third planet. No, no, no. Instead, those sons of bitches stopped just short of Mars. Or I should say, just outside of Mars, if you're on our side. Oh, you bastards. They jumped in right when the Martian fleet turned their guns towards them. And for a moment, the sky just lit up with all sorts of fire. There was smoke in the air from all sorts of torpedoes and missiles that immediately fired. Drones were launched at such an insane rate my own system couldn't keep up with seeing what was going on. And the battleships and destroyers that were there immediately turned their turrets on each other and blasted away. The resulting fireballs that happened as each round struck each side was absolutely devastating. If it wasn't for the fact that I knew there was another fleet on FTL approach towards Earth, I would have immediately jumped towards Mars right then and there. But I knew it, because I had trained people on this. Don't go chasing. Just like in basketball, you don't chase, you'll burn yourself out and you will be completely out of position. So I maintained course. And my heart dropped as I saw the Martian fleet, for all their firepower, for all their senses, for all their planning, were getting torn apart. They were giving very much more than they were getting, but they were just so outnumbered. They must have been outnumbered 40-1. It was insane. I'm looking through, and immediately I could see piranha units blinking out. I knew that if they jumped with just their fighters, they would be adrift for about 14 seconds if it took from Earth to Mars. Even though the jump drives for such a small ship are very good, you're still adrift for that much, which means if anybody, and I mean anybody, cracks a shot at you, you're done. I saw at least 3,000 or 4,000 different fighters and another dozen larger ships, destroyers and frigates mostly, jump into Martian space trying to protect them, so that the enemy fleet was surrounded on multiple sides and taking fire from all sides. I could see that they were starting to get the upper hand, but humans, when you corner us, well, just like any other animal, we charge. And with that, they used an old trick where they jumped, a micro jump, into the center of the fleet. They swung their turrets around and began to fire like mad. Even if the destroyer that did so, or the battleship that did so, was destroyed, the resulting explosion and debris field would take out many of the enemy ships. It was more of a kamikaze move than anything else. They didn't expect to survive. But given the numbers advantage the enemy had, this was all they had left. Ride or die, motherfucker, was all I heard over the radio. And with that, I reached up and acted like I was tipping my hat. And then I patted the chest right above the heart. Respect, my friends. I'll see you on the other side. I looked on in sheer horror as I'm seeing the radar about 20 to 30 seconds before the enemy ships jump into the Sol sector right next to us. But I was also looking at Mars, thinking, what the hell? Why can't I just go? I want to go. It was like chewing acid-covered rubber. It was painful. But it wouldn't be painful for very long. Another fleet jumped in. These I recognize, you reptilian fuckers. As soon as I saw their capital ships come in, I immediately locked on and gave the go for all weapons to fire at will. Within my ship, everyone let loose. Inside the Corvette, I didn't have to worry about running out of torpedoes, as there was an autoloader. I only had 4 tubes. But every single time 4 of them fired, it only took about 10 to 15 seconds before the tubes were reloaded with an automated system, and then they could fire again. The enemy fleet didn't realize that Earth would be the most defended, or if they did, they didn't realize what type of firepower they would be facing. Torpedoes, energy weapons, missiles, railguns, you name it, everything was heading for them. They were loaded for bear and began to fire within 3 seconds of coming out of their FTL, which was surprising. They've upgraded. And yet, it was still not enough. I realized that the Piranha units were beginning to swarm in on the enemy. The drones were making it extremely difficult, but our turrets started wasting into them. It was absolute madness. And during this, I called up my XO and told him, "You have the con," as I ran off to my fighter. Without skipping a beat, he called everybody to board their fighters and get ready. I knew there was only going to be 2 left on the Corvette. The oldest, my XO, and the youngest, because I had not made her a ship yet. The rest of us would go out and add our firepower to that of the entire Earth fleet. At least, those on this side of the planet. Those on the other side of the planet, and also at the northern pole, were all engaged at this point. These tricky bastards had come at us from every different direction. When they said that these folks were coming in from everywhere, they were not kidding. As soon as we cleared the Corvette, I ordered him to hold back as far as he can and hold position, defend Earth. But I don't want him into the furball. The Corvette is too large for that, and it's not as well armored as I'd like. It cannot handle a heavy go-round against destroyers and battleships like that. As we fought off, I pinged my location, and they all formed in on me. We locked in with each other, and again found our targets. This time firing 50% of our torpedoes. Torpedoes away! And off they go into the ether. It would take about 40 seconds for them to hit from this distance. And from there, we just broke away. And I told them to engage at will. Marking all ours as friendly, we went into the fray. Though our fighters are stealth rigged, we still know that they can pick us up at short ranges. Short ranges, which is about 3/4 of a kilometer out, which is well within range of most of our guns. But it wouldn't matter if they can lock on with their secondary point defense systems. They'll just tear you apart. And as I went in, I called on my AI. Yes, we started using AIs now. I didn't have enough crew that everyone could lock into a turret into each fighter. It wasn't going to happen. The AI would take care of the turrets around our defenses. The turrets were, of course, energy-based weapon systems, and the only limitation to them would be making sure that energy flew to each one of them and to make sure they were cold enough that they didn't overheat. The pulse weapons these engineers had figured out were unbelievably strong, and the AI was incredibly accurate. The enemy must have realized this, as every single fighter that went in was almost completely untouched, as drones were simply knocked out of space, just one right after the other. It was like watching them hit a wall, an invisible wall that simply sliced them to pieces. And as soon as we got within range, it was missiles away. The missiles were mainly focused on the engine compartments if they could, or if the bridge was able to be pierced by missiles. The missiles may be much more agile to take down any type of fighter, but they lacked the sheer power of the torpedoes. The missiles made short work of the smaller corvettes and frigates on the enemy side, and I believe that is when they realized they had just kicked the hornet's nest, and these hornets really love to sting. I know this because at that point they began to turn, firing their retro boosters away from Earth. What I didn't realize at that time is they were drawing us away. As we got in close, we realized that another FTL jump was coming in. By the time I realized what was going on, the rest of us realized what was going on. It was too late. Another fleet had come in between our position and the southern pole, and they almost had a clear run straight towards the planet if it wasn't for our satellites. Our defense satellites may be a bit out of date by now, but they were more than enough to take care of those bastards. They tried to come in with some sort of destroyer that I've never seen before. Its main gun seemed to power up, but it wasn't powering up nearly fast enough. The satellites turned and began to fire everything they had. They were mainly guarded with torpedoes and 3 main energy weapons, which fired in succession, one right after the other, giving enough time for each one to cool down before firing again. This, of course, based on the old Vulcan cannon, made it so there was always fire going out. I remember flipping and burning my fighter so that I could join the fray, calling up for the rest of my crew to follow me and we'll blindside these sons of bitches. They couldn't see us coming due to us being stealth rigged, which gave us a good chance. We all locked into each other again and fired our remaining torpedoes. Without them even knowing, and I know this because their turrets didn't even activate, and their point defense systems were firing wildly to shoot the torpedoes. They didn't know where the torpedoes were coming from, yet they slammed into the side of their formation, ripping them apart. The secondary formations many times breaking large sections of their ship completely off, sometimes in half. Sometimes the engine compartment would separate, causing a mass overload and then blowing up, forcing the rest of the ship towards the planet, but tumbling the way it was would immediately burn up through the atmosphere and wouldn't be nothing but vapor by the time it reached the planet. We knew that we could hold them for the time being. That's if we could get rearmed. At this point, we were dry. At least my wing was completely dry on torpedoes and missiles. We made one strafing run towards the enemy fleet, taking out 2 more of their frigates and making them go adrift. As they vented atmosphere, they drifted more into the enemy fleet, but they had gotten smarter again. They were in very much position to maneuver away from any of their own disabled ships. I was hoping that they would fly into each other, but no dice. Instead, we just had to take our 1 kill and bug out. Again, having to flip and burn, causing at least my heart to smack against my spine a few times every time I did that. Oh, I'm getting too old for this shit. Immediately, we got back to the Corvette after I screamed for everyone, "RTB, reload, now!" We got back in, and the automated systems were there to catch us, get us inside, and start reloading the ships as fast as possible. While doing that, I made sure there was no extra damage to the ships. Unfortunately, one of the fighters that made it back would need repairs and would have to stay on the Corvette until repairs were completed. The automated system was already working, and she was working on her own fighter to make sure it was good. I looked at her as I ran down to make sure everything was good. She simply gave me a thumbs up. "I'm good. You go back out there and kick their ass." "You got it." I immediately turned back to my fighter, which the automated system was just now finishing up reloading. With all the systems combined, as long as you got the fighter in place, it didn't take more than 1.5 minutes for them to reload everything. Torpedoes, missiles, energy components, didn't matter. What did matter was if we got damaged. I didn't think she'd be able to get back out into space, but it didn't matter. I called for the rest of my crew. "Let's go. If you're loaded, we're gonna get these bastards." And off into space we went. I wanted to figure out where we were going. Locking into the radar, I tried to find where the largest group was, but everything Everything was on fire. Every ship out there had been taking some sort of damage. The only thing that hadn't been torn apart was a lot of our snub fighters, just because they're stealth rigged and just simply hard to hit. But every single one of the large ships, even our dreadnoughts that had been protecting the far side of the moon, were just burning. If you want to say burning in space is a thing. They were venting atmosphere like crazy. And one was adrift. I didn't know if it was out for the count, but it was definitely drifting. The other one charged up its main guns, and I saw it pierce right through 2 enemy battleships in one go. I guess 2 for the price of 1 today. We immediately banked off as I looked in to see what the next target would be. I figured, screw it. Our closest target is our closest target. While we were flying towards it, we had about a minute before we even got close enough to fire torpedoes. So I scanned to see what was going on in Mars. And Mars, oh God. Oh, fuck me. Mars was being shelled from orbit. Just under a dozen of their own destroyers were firing down. Not a single one other of the enemy fleet was still there, but then again, there wasn't any of ours. Our satellites must have run dry on torpedoes. Mars was not nearly as defended as Earth was, but they were still firing down on it. The domes that protected everybody as we were terraforming Mars, were all torn asunder. Oh, you just gave everyone a reason to hate you. Oh, wait a minute. What about Venus? I turned the radar really quick to look at Venus, and oh, shit. Oh, thank God. They were able to hold off their attackers a lot better. The attackers tried to go into Venus's atmosphere, but we had not fully terraformed it yet. They didn't realize that the acid storms that Venus is enough to tear apart any of the seals on their ship. It was almost comical to watch them go in for a bombing run and watch their ships literally fall apart in mid-flight. They couldn't figure out what was going on, and the fact that there was so much junk in Venus's atmosphere, it made it impossible for them to use anything besides mass drivers to actually fire down on the planet. But they were trying. Every time they fired at one of our ships that dodged out of the way, they would make sure it was a shot that dropped down on the planet. You sons of bitches. With this new news, I sent it very quickly to my crew. One of them wanted to go and live on Venus. He had met someone, and she lived there. Now he wanted blood so bad I could actually feel it through the transponder we were using. I told him, you want blood? There's blood right in front of us. Link up. And with that, we linked again to make sure that battle group that was in front of us that was engaging the satellites was completely covered. 100%. Torpedoes away. And with that, all of my tubes fired at once, and so did the rest of them. We could tell that for some reason they wanted to know where the torpedoes were coming from. As soon as they leave our tubes, they're easily discovered by any type of radar. They leave so much of a heat corona, it's absolutely insane. And for the briefest of moments, their sensors can find us. As soon as we fired our torpedoes, we had to bank off so that we could not get fired on. The enemy turned its guns towards us where we were and fired a full volley trying to get us. They didn't realize it was standard tactics to break away as soon as you fire for this very reason. Guess what, you alien bastards? We learned too. I could only imagine what was going through their minds as their shots all completely missed. And yet the torpedoes were still on their way. Again, we saw the turrets turn, but this time they fired towards the torpedoes. Their main guns were strong enough to take them out. The problem is being able to hit the damn things. Torpedoes may fly straight and true, but they're still armored. So a glancing shot's not going to do anything except force it to readjust its flight pattern. And then it will come in at an just strange angle. We watched with a bit of delight, and at that point I could hear my crewman's voice, his laughter, as many, many lives were snuffed out as that barrage of torpedoes came in and blasted right into the side of their battle group, at least what was left. It was at that time we realized that other fighter groups had come in, because it was just a wave after wave after wave of torpedoes hit that battle group and tore it asunder. The last of their ships must have realized they were screwed. They turned and tried to burn out of there, but it was too late. They were well within range of even the farthest line of sight satellites, and they fired on with reckless abandonment. These AI have absolutely no remorse for anyone, and they just started tearing them all to pieces. However, to our horror, they did something I didn't expect. One of their battleships flipped and burned and headed straight towards Earth. I was out of torpedoes, and I'm out of missile range. The damn things won't catch it in time. So we had to watch as this ship nosed straight through the atmosphere as the satellite still fired into its hull. The problem is, once you start getting in the atmosphere, the heat that comes off the hull dissipates the lasers. And any type of particle arrays, it scatters it. They won't be effective. I saw an entire city get wiped off the map with one hit. One hit, and that ship's reactor exploded. The resulting explosion was like a hydrogen bomb going off, as far as how far out it spread. From the surface, I couldn't imagine what it was like, but from space, it looked like somebody had dropped napalm, and this ring of fire had just spread out in every direction. I simply said to my crew, RTB and reload now. As I flipped and burned back to the Corvette, I realized not everyone had done so. They were just completely mystified at what they saw. I had to get it. I said now. With that, they all went back. And as we got towards the Corvette, I realized that the Corvette had a little bit of trouble while we were gone. I could see the point defense cannons were already starting to move this way and that, and several sides of the Corvette already showed damage. It looked as though a couple of the drones had actually gotten through and did a couple strafing runs, but not realizing that the point defense cannons for this Corvette were extremely good. I was inside the Corvette reloading and double checking my equipment. I had taken a small strafe on the side, which didn't take but more than a couple of minutes to fix. I looked over at one of my crewmen, and she was still working on hers frantically, trying to get it ready for battle, but she had apparently taken a harder hit than it originally looked. And I really don't think she's going to be ready by the end of the battle. Her ship, otherwise, was ready to rock and roll. As I watched the automated system load the last of its missiles on, I just got in my command couch and I began to look at what the battle was out there. We were holding them off. The entire force of humans was holding them off, but our losses were unimaginably strong. I looked at the percentage. 69% material loss. With that number, I have no idea what the personnel loss is going to be, but it's going to be pretty freaking high. But it was still to the point where we were holding off those, and no more FTL pings were coming in. I took a little solace in that as I climbed back in and strapped in. All right, if you're ready to rock and roll, detach, let's go, is all I sent to everyone. And as I drifted out, I started hearing the ping. That's what we call it, but it was an alarm. There was something else coming, something big. Something really big was coming through FTL, and I didn't know where, at least not for a few moments. The frickin' thing was just on the opposite side of Luna, our moon. It jumped in, and I could imagine that the gravity well created by this frickin' thing was enough to cause major problems for anyone on the surface. But that was going to be the least of their worries, that we didn't stop this massive whatever in the hell it was. And then I looked a little closer as I began scanning it, and so did everyone else. It was a space station. It was a space station very similar to the one that I had been taken to and sold off after the gladiatorial games. Oh my God, what are they thinking? This thing is about maybe a quarter the size of our moon, maybe a little bigger, maybe a third. Why would they bring a space station here? Did they think it was going to be that easy? Did they think we were going to just roll over and play dead? Oh no, we're going to roll over and piss in your eye. But that wasn't what it was for. From inside the space station, they played their trump card, and every single ship they had hidden inside just came out. It was like somebody had quite literally kicked over a beehive, and the bees were now coming out. It was to the point where my own sensors could not pick up all of them. I could just imagine that those on the surface were completely going nuts. They must have thought they were safe, though, in something so large, but they never understood what we as humans could do. The space station itself may have been on the opposite side of the planet of the moon, but it was a whole lot closer. And being a lot closer, it was within range. On the surface, massive cannons turned their way to the sky, locking onto this. Our ground-based space defense cannons were ready to fire, and they all fired in a wave of destruction unseen before by the entire universe, even facing off the entirety of the human fleet. These massive shells were about the size of a small office building as they flew up through the atmosphere, exceeding Mach 9. The burst that came out of these was absolutely insane. Most of them were built far away from any sort of building, as the recoil and also the blast from each of them was going to be enough to shatter every window and knock over many buildings. They may be railguns, but moving something through the air at that speed is going to cause a hell of a shockwave. And it did. Again, I can only imagine what the aliens thought, thinking they were invincible inside this battle station or whatever the hell it was. This arena station, this commerce, whatever, I don't even know, nor did I care, but I just enjoyed the fact that I could see it being perforated on all sides by those massive slugs. They ripped from one side to the other, ripping them completely a new asshole. Actually, several dozen new assholes. And with that, the station actually turned. I didn't think it would. The damn thing actually turned. The force of the rounds hitting it forced it way back. I could see it drifting back as debris was flying away. But then they did something really stupid. They fired rockets. Are they insane? What do they think they're doing? And then I heard the pinging again. What? There's more? Are you kidding me? Then just within my own weapons range, I saw another massive ship come in. But this one, I've never seen this one before. Is this a new species? What the hell is that thing for? Oh, shit. With that, I saw its bow begin to open, and it charged a weapon that I knew exactly what it was there for. I told my crew, fire everything, now! Fire everything into that goddamn ship! And with that, we did. We fired missiles, torpedoes, any type of ballistic weapons we had, anything that would reach that ship, trying to knock it out before it fired. Around the entire world, there was another half a dozen of these same ships getting ready to fire down on our planet. The satellites, what were left, still fired everything they had into this thing. It seemed to slow the one in front of me down just a little bit, but it still fired its first blast. With its blast, it strafed a line right across the northern hemisphere, diagonally down through Asia. If I had to remember my geography correctly, it tipped the edge of Mongolia, hit Russia, down towards the Middle East. It hit the Persian Gulf and into Africa before it stopped firing. It only stopped firing because our ordnance began to tear it apart. This thing, for all its grandeur, had no armor worth a crap. Our torpedoes got so far deep into it they actually blew out the other side. Our missiles could rip right through its armor. This thing is the epitome of a glass cannon. I checked my sensors, and each of them were beginning to fire as well, but they were also being knocked out very, very quickly. But not quickly enough. 2 of them were able to fire a second time, and this time the result scorched the earth in such a way that was absolutely insane. They seemed to be focusing almost primarily on surface areas, which makes sense, we're not aquatic, but I wouldn't realize that till later. I flew my fighter in as fast as I could, right to the one that we had thought we may or may not have knocked out, and now began strafing it with every weapon I had. I turned my turrets directly towards it and fired until the heat alarm started to go off. With every single fighter around us doing the exact same thing, we tore this thing to pieces. We could see its own crew being vented into space as its own shell, that little bit of it there was stripped away. If they were inside some sort of battle bridge, we didn't see it. Quickly scanning, we couldn't find any life on board. But none of us took any chances. As soon as the heat alarm subsided, we fired again, this time severing the main power conduits from the rest. That way the weapon could not fire again. To our absolute horror, our planet, our beautiful blue and green jewel, was now strafed with these horrible, horrible scorch marks. It was insane. At least it's almost impossible to get enough power to actually shatter a planet with one hit. But they just tried to glass our planet. When the battle finally ended not much later, what was left of the alien forces limped away. We were still firing on them, what little bit of ordnance we had left. We took stock of everything. I flew back to my Corvette. The Corvette was almost in shambles. It had been hit by a lot of debris and several strafing runs itself, but I had made sure that the hull was extremely thick. That cost me extra, but I'm glad I put it on. The last fighter that was in there that had been knocked out of the fight, she was still trying to make it work. For some reason, she couldn't get that final engine to operate, and she needed it to maneuver. When she saw us coming back in and we weren't rearming, she just ran up to me, grabbed a hold of me. "Are you okay? Is everybody okay?" I just yelled out, "Status!" And everybody responded, "Roger, ready up, ready up, ready up, ready up, ready up." I got up to the bridge and I began to take stock of what was going on. I looked out through the sensor array and was just in tears. They had just destroyed so many. For what? For what? To send a message? You didn't kill us. You didn't take us prisoner. You didn't even take out the entire planet, although the resulting blast did cause one of the supervolcanoes to become slightly active. We worried that it would cause some sort of activity, but the only thing that truly happened was one of our fault lines shifted, causing another major earthquake. That we can handle. The result of the battle in total, even though I was grateful, I still had all my crew. I knew how lucky we were. I knew how lucky because I realized that our material losses across the board were 91%. 91% material loss with a 53% personnel loss. Of everyone who fought, 53%. But that didn't cover everyone, now did it? On Mars, they were lucky. Most everyone in Mars lives underground. The domes are more for recreation and for growing crops. They're not for people to live on. Because they were so deep in the Martian soil, the bombardment actually didn't get them. Most of the Martians got away without nearly a scratch. Their fleet is down to just a few patrol ships, a couple of corvettes, and several dozen fighters. That was all. But they fought off the invasion. The Venusians fared just about as well, actually a little better, as the strafing runs on the planet didn't work. And every single time they tried to bring a ship in, it would be falling prey to the Venusian atmosphere. Apparently, they didn't realize how completely dangerous and deadly that planet truly is. Venus, maybe the god of love, but she's a cruel bitch. They had actually survived much better, with most of their fleet destroyed, but 42% were still intact. Although the loss of life still bothers me. They didn't have a very large population to start with. Satellite losses from all three planets reached over 70%, though they did hold the line. Losses on the ground. Holy crap. Over 1.5 billion lost. Most of them didn't even know what hit them. Those massive heat beams that they were using simply set everything ablaze down to 57 meters into the surface. Everything, down to bacteria at that depth, was gone. We looked around. I got a hold of the command. Our saving grace, surprisingly, was the actual cannons on the ground. Many of them did survive, and was probably the reason why the enemy pulled back, knowing that they couldn't take Earth anymore, and probably were afraid that there were cannons on Mars and Venus. There weren't, but there will be. Because as we finally took stock, as I took my crew into my arms and held them tight, I realized something. Around the universe, humans have got a reputation for being monsters, for taking apart entire armies because of our speed, our strength, our skill, and our incredible cunning, our way to work around problems. The way they looked at us was monsters. Monsters to be feared into the night. Monsters that, if not collared, if not tamed, would have to be destroyed. Well, they have just given legions of monsters a reason to end their existence.